more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA, and I'm Susan Burrell. And so I just want to, before we jump into our guest and our interview, I just want to remind people to go to the website livingyourinspiredlife.org, where you can listen to all the amazing conversations we've had over the past year and a half and really begin to develop your awareness, your consciousness, your way of being for yourself so that you can live a life that you were meant to live. So with that said, I want to welcome today author Allison Carmen. She's written a book called The Gift of Maybe, Finding Hope and Possibility in Uncertain Times. Allison, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
So I got to say, when the title of your book came across my email, I was like, well, yeah, I guess I better have this conversation. What do you think? So I like this idea of maybe, because in it in the first chapter, you say you had an addiction to certainty. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. For most of my life, I didn't know that I had one, but when I figured it out, I realized I was an addict. I always needed to know what was going to happen next in my life. And if I didn't know, I projected things were going to be bad or things weren't going to work out in my life. And I think a lot of people have that problem, that we write these stories in our lives because we're so afraid that we're not going to get what we want in life. And then when things don't happen the way we thought they would, we close down as if life's not going our way. We forget that there's another aspect, this idea of maybe. And when I was young, I was able to manage it. I was always worried that I wasn't going to get into a good college. I wasn't going to do well in school. I wasn't going to get a good job. But, life was easy because I was living in my parents' house and they were taking care of me. But as I got older, things became more complicated. And so I wrote this story that my life would be great when I became an attorney, that I could stress and worry now, but one day everything will work out because this one thing is going to happen, and then the balloons are going to come down, and life will be great. And I remember my first day of work, I got a job. I graduated law school. I got a job at a large law firm. I was overlooking Central Park West. It was beautiful. My day arrived. And the second day of work, my office mate comes in and says, Allison, they're firing half the first years. And I was a first year at the time. So all of a sudden, the anxiety reached another level. Are they going to fire me? Can I afford my rent? What are my parents going to think? And of course, they didn't fire me. I worked really hard, but the anxiety had already reached a new level. So then my obsession became, are they going to like my memo? Am I going to get a raise? Is my husband going to leave me? Is there going to be a terrorist attack in New York City? And when you're worrying all the time and you're anxious, you're going to stop sleeping. So I stopped sleeping, and my immune system started to become compromised, and then I started to go to all these doctors. And I said, please help me. I don't feel good. And they took all this blood work, and they said, Allison, there's nothing wrong with you, but here's this little blue pill, and it'll make you feel better.
Oh, boy. Yeah, the
and
blue
that
pill.
was for anxiety.
Right.
But I was so anxious that I was anxious about the pill. So I decided to change my diet, and I did acupuncture. I did all these beautiful things to find balance in my life. But the minute something unexpected happened in my life, I spun out of control. And then one day, I heard this beautiful story, which I share in the first chapter of my book, and it's a Taoist story, and it's about this farmer. And he had a horse, and the horse ran away. And his neighbor came by and said, you have the worst luck. And the farmer's like, maybe. And the next day, the horse came back with 5 mares. And the neighbor came by and said, you have the best luck. And the farmer said, maybe. And the next day, the farmer's son was on the horse. He broke his leg. And the neighbor came by and said, oh, you have the worst luck. And the farmer said, maybe. And the next day, the army came to take the son, but they couldn't because his leg was broken. And the neighbor came by and said, you have the best luck. And the farmer said, maybe. And in the Taoist tradition, the story means things are neither good or bad. They just change. But for me, maybe because I grew up in the West, all of a sudden I heard that story, and all this hope came out of I actually felt like a pop in my chest.
Wow.
And I felt so hopeful because I always worried the horse was going to run away. It never occurred to me that he was going to come back with 5 mares. And so when I got home that day, I threw every worry and every thought up against this idea of maybe. And I realized that I wasn't absolutely certain that my worst fear was going to happen. Was I going to get a new client? Well, I wasn't certain that I wasn't, so what else could there be? And there was this idea of maybe. Maybe whatever I'm experiencing in my life is good. Maybe it could get better. Or maybe I could accept whatever I'm experiencing and still be okay. And I just kept playing with this idea, and it changed everything to me, and it changed my life.
It sounds like it. I have a quote from your book, Allison, that speaks to this idea of maybe and that there's hope. In it, you said, in maybe, our minds settle into a place where we not only acknowledge that we do not know, we also feel good about not knowing. It is as if we are liberated from everything that has happened before in our lives, and we are brought into a new place where there is hope that our lives can be different.
Yeah.
And
whoever wrote that is so smart.
I know, she is. I got to meet this lady. So this is a lot of, I loved your book because this is a lot of what we talk about here on Living Your Inspired Life, is that place of being, an affirmation I've been using the last, 2 or 3 years is, I trust the unknown. And when I try and explain that to people, they're like, what? Oh my God, that's creepy. What do you mean you trust the unknown? But my life had hit such a brick wall that the only thing I could do was trust the thing I didn't know. Because everything that I knew, everything, I was a certainty addict like yourself. And it's certainly this, looking at the unknown and being able to trust that as opposed to trusting what I knew, totally changed my life, totally turned everything around. So that it is that place of the middle ground, if you will, the middle way, as the Buddhists say, of the maybe.
Right. And some people, and what this idea of maybe is really a tool for people to get there. Because if you think about it, like most people I meet, they wake up in the morning and they want to be positive, but they fear uncertainty. So they'll have an idea like, I'm going to start this business, and I'm going to have 30 clients at the end of the month, and I'm going to make $20,000. But at the end of the month, they have 2 clients, and they make $2,000. And all of a sudden, it didn't go. They wrote this story, and because it didn't go the way that they thought it would, life's not working out. Things aren't okay. But if you remember this idea of maybe, you can kind of get away from this positive, negative thinking, and you could say, well, okay, it didn't work out exactly as I thought, but maybe things are still okay. Maybe things will change. And that's the most powerful of all maybe statements. Maybe everything's still okay. So I kind of say that maybe is like a cognitive faith. It takes us from this place where we're writing stories and beliefs about what needs to happen in our lives. We go to this, it's like a bridge, and maybe allows us to say, well, maybe it doesn't have to happen that way. Maybe there's another way my life can be, manifest. So, and it makes you more uncomfortable in the unknown, because if you think about it, if you're not happy in your life today, the only place it can change is in uncertainty, is in the unknown.
Right.
So really the unknown is our friend. And if we turn towards it and open up and we're willing to engage in it, life will change.
I have clients that I work with that they'll come to me. I'm thinking of this one person in particular, and he wanted to set goals for achieving stuff in his career, and I'm like, okay, so we can do that, absolutely, because that gives you a focus. But there is this place where you have to hold that loosely, because if you say, well, this is like you're saying, if you write the story that it's all going to happen in this linear manner, then you're setting yourself up for some issues, because it's going to go in whatever zigzag, crazy manner it's going to go to get to the place that you think you want to be. And it's going to look completely different.
And sometimes you end up in a different place, and that's great too.
Right, and it's even better than we could have imagined, yeah?
Right. And even the story of my book, it took me 5 years to get a publisher for my book. And when I look back, at the time, I got rejected again and again and again, and I heard responses like, she's not famous enough. We don't know who she is. She has no platform. But I always approached it with the maybe. I could have looked at it and said, okay, well, this is never going to happen for me. No one's ever going to publish my book. But instead, I leaned in with an open heart and said, okay, well, what does this mean? Maybe there's something else. Maybe there's another way. And I actually started to blog, and I would have never become a blogger in a million years. But I was like, wow, I have this book. I have to get my writing out there. Best experience of my life, blogging. I now blog for Huffington Post, Psychology Today. I've met people from around the world, and I've had the opportunity to write about these things that are important to me that I believe will help other people. So all of a sudden I become this blogger, and I have this new identity, and things are growing. And again, I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I go back to the publishers, and they're like, sorry, not good enough, not ready. And so I self-published my book. And again, I would have never self-published a book. But I was in the maybe. I was like, okay, well, I have this book, and nobody wants to publish it, so here I go. So I kept engaging in this open space, and then finally I'm like, I'm just going to give this book away. And 29,000 people downloaded my book, and I was on the Amazon bestseller list for free books, and then I was on the Amazon bestseller list for books that you pay for weeks after, next to Wayne Dyer. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, it's like a dream come true. And then finally a big publisher picked up my book. But it took all that time. And if I wasn't in Maybe, I would have shut down 1,000 times. But because I was in Maybe, the experience of those 5 years was just as good as getting the book published. You know what I'm saying? It's like all those things that happened to me were so amazing. And I feel like I've grown so much. And so many things about who I am today was because of that experience, not because my book got published, but because of the journey that I took. And had I not been in Maybe, I probably would have shut down years ago. So it just goes to show if you stay open, you don't always know where you're gonna land, but sometimes you land in a pretty good place, and you end up having some pretty beautiful experiences.
It sounds like it. I love that. Thank you for sharing that story with me, because it just goes to show you that if you're resilient or you're persistent enough, anything can happen. And you talk about that in your book. You talk about that the philosophy of Maybe is about being resilient and flexible. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think the reason people aren't flexible is, again, because they're afraid. I mean, we talk about faith, right? Faith is knowing you'll be okay no matter what. And if you don't have that faith, your life's going to be based on beliefs, the stories that we write. And we write these stories just to make ourselves feel better. So we write the story that our child needs to go to this particular college, not because we really want them to go to the college, it's because we want them to be okay. And we write the story that this is the job I have to have until I retire. And sometimes it's really not that we love this job, but this job makes us feel sturdy. So what happens is that we hang on to these stories, and when they don't happen, we spin out of control. So, and then we forget that maybe things are still working out. And intellectually, I think most people know that. I think intellectually, most people know that every end is a beginning and life always changes, but emotionally, we fail to hold on to that idea. Isn't that true? That's where we can't hold on because we're so worried that we're not okay. So with this idea of maybe, when you lose that job, you might have liked that job, but this idea of maybe you recognize, okay, life is going to change, and in that change, there's hope. There's things in that change that I do like. It's almost like you could put your one greatest fear in a little test tube, or you could drop it in the ocean. And so much more is possible because it's almost like diluted. That one fear gets diluted when you throw all the other possibilities at it. So the more open we are, I think we become more resilient because we have a larger perspective on life. We don't think like, oh, this is it, this one job, and if I lose this job, I'm never going to get another job again. I mean, it doesn't sound rational, but emotionally, a lot of us, we feel this way. So
it's almost like we have tunnel vision, and we just focus on that one possibility, and you can't even see beyond it.
Right. Emotionally, we can't. And it's funny because I do think sometimes, we intellectually someone could say, oh, stop worrying, everything will work out. And because of our habits and how we're brought up and based on our negative thinking, as much as people say that to us, we can't get out of it. And what this idea of maybe did for me, it allowed me to get out of that habit, that way of thinking, because I literally asked myself, am I absolutely certain that let's say that person who is afraid they're not going to get a job, am I absolutely certain that I'm never going to get another job? You would say intellectually, of course I'm not absolutely certain. I could get another job. And then you start putting those maybe statements down, and that's where you release emotionally. And you say to yourself, well, what else is there? Maybe I will get a job. Maybe there's something else I need to look at. Maybe everything's okay. And the more you write those statements down, eventually you will have that emotional release, and eventually, intellectually and emotionally, you'll open up on the same level, and things will start to happen. Or at least you'll feel better because you will feel more hopeful.
Well, I got to tell you, Allison, I was walking this morning, And I was practicing this maybe idea, thinking about a particular situation I'm in, and I'm like, well, maybe that'll happen. Well, maybe that'll happen. Maybe that won't happen, and this will happen. Well, and I did feel more of a breath or an expansion around this situation, so that I wasn't so because I tend to be like a dog with a bone. It's like once I grab onto it, it's like, no, mine, 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 mine. And so it really helped today to just go, well, maybe, and just looking at seeing that there were more possibilities in this one place where I was putting my focus.
And you felt lighter, probably.
I did, actually.
Yeah.
Which I was kind of like, I mean, it's a good situation that I was looking at, but it made me feel happier and lighter. And I was like, all right, so the thing I got out of your book is I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to it's not my job to figure it out. It's just my job to go, well, maybe. Right. What if maybe?
Right, because sometimes the answer's not there. Sometimes you could bang your head against the wall from today till tomorrow, but the opportunity or working the situation out, it hasn't come to fruition. And we have to wait. And it's the waiting sometimes that forces that we start to write these stories.
Oh, it makes you so uncomfortable.
Yes, I once had a situation, it was a couple of years ago, where my daughter was having stomach problems. And the doctor said maybe she has celiac. And that was like someone pulled the rug from under me. And rationally I understand that people have celiac disease in our society and they're able to function and they're able to live very good lives. But at that moment, I didn't want my daughter to have it. And I couldn't see beyond it. And I got so stuck in that moment. And that was it. And I had to wait 10 days to get her blood work back. So what was I going to do for 10 days? I was making myself sick. I wrote The Gift of Maybe, and I was making myself sick. So after like 2 hours, I sat myself down, and I actually did that exercise that I just spoke about. I said, are you my biggest fear was my daughter has celiac disease, and she won't be okay. I mean, that's every parent, that when parents worry about their children, it's ultimately my child won't be okay. And I said, well, am I absolutely certain that my daughter Amanda won't be okay? And I said, no. So what else could be possible? And just like you, I went through my maybe statement. Maybe she has celiac disease, and that's okay. Maybe she doesn't have it. Maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe it's okay for me to just wait for the answer and be present. Or maybe all these thoughts I'm having aren't true. And I just, again and again and again, I wrote one sentence down, another sentence down. It took me a half hour. But you know what happened in a half hour? I felt exactly how you felt during your walk. I felt lighter. I felt more open. I felt like, okay, this is not something I chose, but there are so many possibilities here. I'm going to be open. I'm going to stay hopeful. And all of a sudden, I came back to the present, and I felt very peaceful. And for those 10 days, I enjoyed my family. I worked. I enjoyed my life. And it turned out she didn't have celiac disease. But what an amazing opportunity to let go of one of my most stressful thoughts and just be open instead. And it's really, I think, a better way to live, a more hopeful and happy way to live.
Well, and it's certainly in the philosophy that I live by, that kind of opening, of relaxing the emotionality of fear and opening into the infinite possibilities that could exist is healing. And who's to say that in that moment of you sitting down with your maybe list, who's to say that you didn't help her to heal whatever was going on in her? Because of us all being connected, this idea of practicing the gift of maybe, connects us on ways that we can't even begin to explain. That then helps, like you said earlier, that helps each other. We help each other in being in that possibility.
Yes, when we let go of the fear, miracles happen.
It was interesting because when I first started reading, I can't remember what chapter it was, one of the first two chapters, I made a note because it seems to me that the need for certainty in our world is part of what's fueling the fear in the world as we watch all these things happening in politics or, around the world, the global health situation, all those things. And people become certain that that's the thing that's wrong, or that's the thing they can't change, or that's the thing that's going to, collapse or get us in the end, or it's a conspiracy, whatever it is. And
Absolutely. I think that that's a really big problem in our society. I know, I live in New York City, and when that doctor came back from, from Africa, he came back and he rode the subway and he went to the bowling alley, he went to all these places. People went nuts in New York City. There were people that wouldn't go on the subway. There were people that wouldn't send their children to school. And it's not that, it's a real health concern in the world. But the fact that we need certainty and we see something and we kind of latch onto it and we almost overreact because we have no other place for it. It's either good or it's either bad. It's either A or it's either B. There's no middle ground. And I think even the way Governor Cuomo and Governor Christie, when they wanted to quarantine everybody, with this idea of maybe, I think it allows us to say, okay, this is something very serious going on, but maybe there are other possibilities. Then it's spreading all over the world. Maybe we need to calm down, and we don't know the answer like we spoke about before. We need to sit back and say, okay, I need to be smart about this, but at the same time, I need to be open for other things to happen. Like maybe everything is going to be okay, and maybe we'll find as a country or as a world, we'll work it out. And the problem is that we shut down from maybe. We don't even help each other. So if we're able to stay open, we're also going to be more giving. We're more likely going to fly. People are more likely going to fly over there to help people. They're more likely going to raise money. They're more likely going to try to find a vaccine, whatever they choose to do with it. So with this idea of maybe I think we could sit and watch the news and not feel game over. Things are bad. Things will never change.
Oh, yeah.
We recognize that there are hardships in life, and that's one of my favorite parts about maybe. There are a lot of spiritual things that people teach, that what you think is exactly what happens, and if you think negative things happen. But with maybe, it doesn't say that. Maybe takes you where you are in the moment, wherever you are, even during a hardship. It doesn't say there are no hardships. It takes you where you are and says what's possible going forward. And that's so beautiful.
I love it. And I have another quote that from your book, Allison, that speaks right to what you're saying. And in it you say, again, as we examine our belief system through the lens of maybe, we start to see that our fear of the future is merely a creation of our own minds. It is a perception that we conjure about reality, one fueled by an inner dialogue centered on our negativity about the future.
Right.
And I this particular thing caught my attention too, for this very reason of what we're just discussing is where do I want to put my attention? Where am I going to choose to focus? And am I going to focus on the fear and the negativity, or am I going to focus on a possibility and more possibilities and then more possibilities?
Right. And it's hard for people, like we talked about before, it's hard for people to get there. If you look at Norman Vincent Peale's book, The Power of Positive Thinking, and what a great book, but that was God-based. That was, be positive because God will take care of everything. So I think people want to put their minds in good places. They want to focus on possibilities, but then when they see the negative, they just get scared, and the fear just takes over. So I think that's the problem, is like, I think people want to have a larger perspective. They want to see things in a better light, but we have to help people get there. And that's about letting go of the fear. So this idea of maybe is just, what it does, it actually just opens up like a little door so people could see some light and have some hope and say, okay, well, maybe it will get better, or maybe what happened to me in the past won't happen again. And maybe there are possibilities that I haven't seen yet. So it allows people to hold that bigger perspective, because without these cognitive tools, it's sometimes hard for people to get there.
Right. And I like, here's the other piece I like about the maybe philosophy that you've uncovered is going back to the power of positive thinking. There's lots of people out in the world, especially when The Secret came out, and everybody's like, okay, I'm going to have a vision board, and I'm going to have this car, and I'm going to do all these things. But there's a place where people tend to use that power of positive thinking as a Band-Aid, or it covers up all the kind of ugliness or not niceness in their lives, and they think that that's okay. And in your philosophy of maybe, just being in the maybe, it addresses everything, like you said earlier in the example of your daughter and her possibly having celiac disease. Well, maybe she has that. Maybe she has that and she's going to be okay. Maybe she has it and she's not going to be. So you get to look at all the spectrum, not just, let me just put a Band-Aid on it and pretend like it's not there.
because what we're doing is we're holding in our emotions. I remember when I first read, years ago, Norman Vincent Peale's book, I was like, I'm just going to be a positive thinker. And for 3 days, I did not let one negative thought into my head. I said, no, not going to think that. I got to be positive. Let me refocus. I went to bed after 3 nights, and I had a nightmare that my mother died, my father died, my mother-in-law died, my father-in-law died. I woke up, and I fell asleep and had the exact same dream.
Oh, my gosh.
That never happened to me before. It never happened to me since. But I think what was really happening is that I was just holding everything in. And I was just holding it down. And when I wasn't watching, I wasn't able to control, my biggest fear came up. And I've seen that happen before with people, that they try to avoid it, they try to be positive, but then something really big happens that they did not expect. And those are the people that have the most trouble dealing, because they have no mechanism. If it's not positive, I can't deal with the negative. I've seen that a lot with some women who separate from their husbands, or maybe someone, has a child who's ill. We don't expect these things. But if we don't have a way to deal with it, and we only want to see life one way, we're going to have a problem. So, and actually the idea of maybe has helped all these people through these times, because it gives them a mechanism to try to do it in a different way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And there's a place of hope that comes out of all of that. Knowing that there is, that if I can have a mechanism, if I can have a tool, a skill set that reminds me that it isn't always going to be this, or there are other possibilities, then I can be more hopeful in my life, as opposed to feeling like everything's shutting down on me.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That's what it's about. That we could hold hope. Because for me, I'm not getting out of bed in the morning if I don't have hope. And it's interesting. I know that a lot of people say, well, hope is an attachment that causes suffering. And I don't believe that. I think what causes our suffering is our inability to be flexible about life, to say life has to happen one way. But the minute you're in maybe, you could hold hope and be free. And that's it's so liberating. It's such a beautiful way to live.
Allison, I love this. What causes suffering is our inability to be flexible. I love that statement. I'm talking to Allison Carmen, the author of The Gift of Maybe, Finding Hope and Possibility in Uncertain Times. You're listening to Living Your Inspired Life, and we'll be right back. Hi, this is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village. You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you. And welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell, and if you're just tuning in, you can go to the website livingyourinspiredlife.org and hear the entire conversation that I'm having today with Allison Carmen, the author of The Gift of Maybe. So, Allison, one of the chapters in your book is it's about a closed door and facing the closed door, and I really liked it because, again, the work I do with clients, I often talk about a closed door. So I don't know, how did we sync up, you and I? I think we have.
How do we what? Excuse me?
How did we sync up?
Just the universe, I guess.
The universe. So I want you to share with everybody the whole concept about the closed door.
Okay. Well, what actually happened, and I wrote this in the book, I was actually watching this movie Madagascar with my children. And one of the animals in the movie got thrown out of the forest, and there was like this door, and it was there was all this open space. He could have gotten in back into the forest or the jungle any place he wanted to, but he thought, this is where I got thrown out. This is the only place I can get back in. And when some of my clients, they love this idea of maybe, but they just couldn't embrace it, and I realized because they couldn't see past the experience they were having. They just couldn't. So this visualization really helped them. And what I asked them to do is, imagine that they had this door right in front of their face, And that's what they were actually doing when they were only seeing their business. Their business could only work out in one way. And then when they pulled it away, I said, pull away the door. And as you pull away the door, you realize there's nothing above it, there's nothing below it, and there's nothing to either side. But that's what happens when we stand so close to one aspect of our lives and we refuse to see it another way. But when we pull back and we're willing to look at things in a larger perspective, we see that there's really nothing around that but open space. And that's when I found that a lot of my clients started to manifest, when they were able to do this visualization of seeing this door, pulling it away, and seeing, wow, this is only one way. There are so many ways that I could create my life.
Well, and it's so funny to me because I know it from my personal experience when I'm facing a door, it's usually closed because you're not supposed to go that way.
Right.
It's like, wow, you're supposed to look around and go, where's the other door? Alice in Wonderland, let me find the other place to go.
But sometimes people, not only they're trying to get in this door, but they don't see the open space. So for them, they're seeing there's only one way.
Right.
It's almost like they're looking at that door that's closed, but it's not like they see there's another option. That's what happens. We become, like we talked about tunnel vision, that's all we really see. If this doesn't happen, my life's not going to work out. If this doesn't happen, I'm going to go bankrupt. If he doesn't call me back, I'm never going to love again. And we don't even know, that there's another way. But when you pull it back, you're like, oh, wow, look, that's just one possibility. There's so much more. And again, it seems so logical. But emotionally, we just can't get there. And that's why those visualizations of the door, I found they really help people, especially in business.
I love that. And I want to read a quote about this door thing. You say, deciding to stop banging on a closed door is not just about figuring out how to achieve your goals in another way. It is also about letting go of a great deal of emotional pain.
Right. So it's like really banging your head against the wall if you think about it.
Yeah.
And it hurts. And again, people would say, I would never bang my head against the wall. But that's what we do when we keep trying to live life a certain way that's not working out. And that's why it's so painful, because we're stuck. And if we're willing to take a step back, we can find that freedom again.
Well, and something else that we talk about on Living Your Inspired Life is to experience the feelings, experience the emotion. You don't have to sit in it and wallow in it, but allow it to move through you so you can see then that there is open space around the door. But if you just constantly, this goes back to resistance that we were talking about earlier. If you're constantly resisting, you're causing suffering in your life.
Right. Yes, you have to feel it. And then that's what's so beautiful about maybe. It doesn't demand you feel anything. It just, after you're done feeling it, it's always there for you. It's always there, and you say, okay, I still feel sad, but maybe things can change. And then slowly over time, you can go from sadness to maybe to openness. But we have to allow people. I remember there was this fellow who read my book, and his wife had died. And he read my book, and he said, Allison, I hate your book. And I said, why? He said, because my life will never get better. He goes, my wife died. And he was obviously grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years later, now he has a girlfriend. And now he came up to me and he said, Allison, it took me a while, but I realized that life has maybe. And it doesn't mean that he's happier now than he was when he was married to his wife. All it merely means is that he looked at his life where he was in the moment and said, what's left? I'm still here. What's possible in my life? And that's what's so beautiful about it, that you get to feel what you have to feel, but you also get to eventually feel hopeful again and find a new way to live.
Well, okay, this goes back to the larger global idea as well, Allison, because I think that certainly our Western culture, here we are in the frenzy of the holiday spirit, and everybody's, addressing it by shopping and spending and buying, and, it's... And I think that happens not because I want to give someone a gift because I love them, but I have to because, and it's like a self-medicating thing as opposed to feeling, getting in touch with what do I feel and how do I want to experience my life and where am I at choice about it. And maybe there's another way to be in the world.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of things that we do in life are fear-based. And, I think that it's great to go out and buy gifts and celebrate the holidays. But, we also have to look at why we're doing it. Are we doing it from a space where we just feel love and we just are looking to express it? Or are we doing it from a space because I have to do this? This is what I'm expected to do. This is how I'm expected to live. And we just feel caught because we're afraid that we're not okay. And that's what's so interesting about maybe, too, is that it's not just about future projections, but it's also about an internal feeling of ourselves, because a lot of people have doubts, and that doubt is sometimes the thing that creates the fear.
Yes.
So with maybe we get to say, okay, well, maybe I'm okay. Because if you say to yourself, I am okay, and you don't believe it, by the end of the day, you're going to be exhausted. Because people say, just know you're okay. But what if you had experiences when you were young, or you had experience at work last year, and you don't feel so great? The battle between negative thinking, between love and fear, it's very hard. That's what maybe does. It just gives us this little opportunity to engage in a new way of thinking. And it really works for a lot of people, because they'll say, well, maybe I am okay. Sometimes that's enough, because you're not battling, I am okay, I'm not okay, just maybe I am. And I've seen a lot of people take steps from there, because it's not demanding. It's soft and it's open. And people end up changing their lives quite often when they engage in this internal idea.
So, Allison, let's talk about the idea of the philosophy of maybe as applied to regret.
Okay. Well, I always say regret is a reverse maybe. And I often have people come into my office telling me all these stories of the road not taken. If I would have gone into that venture and invested with Joe, I would have been so successful today. If I would have found a new technology, if I would have married that guy, my life would be perfect now. And now look at me, I'm getting divorced. But what's so interesting about these stories is they're always beautiful. They never have any twists. They never have any turns. It's almost like that would have been pristine. Yet the life we live today has twists and turns. So when you think about it, it's just a story we're writing, and we really have no idea how life would have worked out had we gone into business with Joe, or had we married that other guy, because things might not have worked out so well. We might have fought with Joe. We might have been at a meeting with Joe and walked out into the curb and got hit by a car. We have absolutely no idea. But all we know is that here we are in the moment with hope and possibility to change our life. And I remember I was sitting with my dad, he was 82 now, and he was telling me the story. He's had a beautiful life, about how he had such regret that he didn't go into the entertainment industry, because he went into the steel business because his father, said, listen, my father's name is Henry. Listen, Henry, I work really hard. You have to go into my business. So out of obligation, my dad did that.
Right.
And he talked about, if I would have went into the entertainment business, I would have had successes, and I would have read scripts and this and that. And, as I was sitting there, I started to feel a little bad and sad for my dad. But then all of a sudden I realized, oh, my goodness, he's writing a reverse maybe, as if no matter everything he would have written would have gotten made. And there never would have been a failed television show, because, he wasn't able to see that. All he was able to see is the path, but he didn't see all the twists and turns for the path not taken. And I said, Dad, you've had a pretty good life, and you have no idea what would have happened if you would have, chosen another path. You might not even be here today. You wouldn't have me. You wouldn't have my other siblings. You wouldn't have married Mom. And I said, it's been pretty good. And he looked at me and said, yeah, maybe it has. But what was so interesting about that moment, there was something about it that he was able to recognize the fact that maybe that other road wouldn't have been better. After that conversation we had, he started to write. And
wow.
He's actually working, who knows what will happen, but he's working on a sitcom right now. He actually helped edit one of his friend's screenplays, and he started working for my friend who runs this not-for-profit film company, and he's giving his comments on these films. Isn't it amazing that when he let go of the regret, for some reason he became open to it again? Instead of it was the opportunity he missed, it became like, wow, I'm really interested in this. So he let it go, and then all of a sudden he was open to do it now. And that's the most fascinating part of it.
It gave me chills when you shared that. I got chills. And I have another quote that I love how this program works, because I have another quote that addresses exactly what you just described. From your book, The Gift of Maybe, you said, once we embrace the philosophy of maybe, our minds stop searching for a finite answer to each problem we are facing. Instead, we become curious and open to creating exciting new pathways in our lives. And that's what your dad did.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I mean, it was really one of the most profound things. And all he said to me, he looked at me after the whole conversation and said, yeah, maybe. And it was just, but it must have been a release for him, because I think those stories weigh so heavily on us, the things we should have done. And it makes us feel like we missed out. It's done. It's over. Nothing more is possible in our lives. And when we're willing to let that go, even if we did forego an opportunity that could have been good, it doesn't mean we can't manifest again. And so it was really interesting. I think if we could let go, I think that's one of the biggest pieces that holds people back, energetically, mentally, emotionally, on all levels.
So, but toward the end of your book, you have a chapter that's about inner strength, and in it you're talking about what I took to mean, changing from within. That the maybe helps you do those kinds of changes.
Yeah, right, because what's happening is that it's not just the outer uncertainty that holds us back; it's the inner uncertainty. And I find that certain people, I could have the best meeting with them, and they could be so excited about all that's possible. But deep down inside, they have uncertainty about who they are and what they're capable of. And often it's based on the past. It's based, sometimes on what someone said to us when we were young. We had a business experience. We had a bad relationship. And we're not willing to engage again. We're shut down because we don't believe it's possible. And so this idea of maybe just allows people, again, to just open up a little bit and say, well, maybe the past is over and maybe things can be different. And it sounds so simple, but it is so profound because it ends the battle between I can and I can't. This is good, this is bad. It's just maybe. And you can't fight with it. You can't argue with it because you realize that, yeah, maybe it is possible. And then just the light goes on, and I find people are willing to take little steps. It's not like someone goes out and goes from total doubt, to becoming the CEO of the largest company in America, but little steps, little maybe steps towards their goals. And I've seen people achieve amazing things and actually change how they see themselves because they allowed things to be different. That's what maybe does. It allows us to be different. And isn't that beautiful? It's like we give ourselves permission to change.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing as you're saying all that is I have permission to look at things differently.
Yeah, and that's what maybe is. We give ourselves permission, and it's beautiful.
That's so funny because the word is. So I have a 20-year-old son. I often share stuff about him, and but when he was a teenager, I would say, are you going to get your homework done? And he would say, maybe. Are you going to come home for dinner tonight? Maybe. Do you want to go to a movie? Maybe. What do you want to do? Maybe. I was like, so the maybe word for me had a little bit of a trigger because it's like, right. Could you just make up your mind?
Right. Well, there's an aspect of that in our society, right? That maybe means you're not strong.
Yes.
Because you need to be in the yes, or you need to be in the no. And yeah, there are times we need to say yes. I mean, if someone says, "Are you meeting me for dinner at 7?" you have to respond. Yes. I mean, it's 5:00. You have to let them know. But there's also an aspect when we're in maybe. Actually, that's where we find our real strength. So yes, there are times we need to be definitive because something's about to happen in the moment. But other than that, if we're able to hang out in this space, we're going to be strong and we're going to be resilient in the face of everything that happens in our lives, and we're going to be willing to stay open and engaged. And that's where life really starts to happen.
Well, and I'm hearing the word fluidity as you're talking right now. It keeps us fluid in our life, and that's the best way to be in life.
Yeah.
When you can do it.
When we can be fluid and be open, we're really going to get the most out of life. And that's what happened to me. I went from a place where I was so busy trying to grasp everything and trying to find that place of certainty that I was really limiting myself. And the minute I let that go, everything opened up for me. And I think that I've seen it happen to a lot of people.
So, Allison, you've shared that you have children. How do you practice the philosophy of maybe with your kids? How does that... Because I would imagine you are definitely teaching them to look at life that way.
Yes. Well, as I told that story before, as a parent, it's life-saving because you're able to let go of these expectations of how things need to be, and you're able to stay hopeful at the same time. But also, children, this is where a lot of their negativity begins in their childhood. And sometimes it's as little as, not doing well in a sport or not making a play, and then children shut down. And they're like, well, I don't like that sport, or I'm not good in that subject because it didn't work out the first time they tried or the second time they tried. And it's very linear. Things are good or things are bad. So when you teach children this idea of maybe, they're willing to engage again. Like if my daughter didn't make the first play she ever tried out for, and she's like, I'm never doing this again. But with this idea, maybe you're like, something, maybe this is good. Maybe you needed to take a couple of singing lessons. Maybe this wasn't the right time for you. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe you'll make the next play. And actually, this weekend, she's starring now she's in high school, she's starring in a production of Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, my gosh.
So, I mean, but look, what would have happened if she shut down? She would have never allowed herself to explore.
Yeah.
So maybe gives children courage. And also when they're watching current events, I mean, when I was young, I didn't know anything that was going on in the world. There was no internet. I went to school. I came home. I played with my friends. Nowadays, my children know about Ebola. They know about terrorism. What are you going to tell them? You can't just say, oh, don't worry, bad things aren't going to happen, because we see things happen in the world. But we can give them hope and say, just because that's happening doesn't mean the world can still change. Things could still get better. There's always maybe. And it's a beautiful way to raise kids. It makes them hopeful, and it makes them courageous. Because instead of saying, game over, things can't change, I can't do anything, it makes them feel like they can. Because in the unknown is hope and possibility. And if you teach your children that, I think they'll be very productive citizens in our society.
Yes, and contributing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what else? We're getting kind of close to the end of our time. We've got about 10 more minutes. What else should we talk about the gift of maybe, Allison?
What else should we talk about? I'm open to talk about anything. I think that if this idea of uncertainty, as we go back to it, I think that I hope that people understand from our conversation that it's a place of hope. It's where our lives will change, and our relationship with uncertainty is really what's controlling our lives. Whether we're going to pursue things, whether we're going to hold back on things, whether our heart's going to be open, whether our heart's going to be closed, and if we start really trying to understand our relationship with that, it's very profound, and I think that people will see huge changes in their lives.
Yeah, I agree. And the idea of where maybe helps us to let go of the past. I have a couple clients that I'm currently helping them to see that the past, while it helped get them to who they are now, that it does not need to continue to define them. Just like you shared that story about your dad, doesn't have to continue to be your definition of self. So it sounds like in the maybe, it's a place of redefining yourself as well.
Right, because you recognize that maybe the past doesn't matter anymore. Maybe it has no relevance. Because if you say the past doesn't matter and you think it does, you're going to get tripped up again. You're going to be in that battle. But when you say maybe things could be different, you realize that logically you're like, yeah, I guess it could be different, and then you're willing to engage. And you're not in the battle. You're just open to, okay, I'm going to be open to this. And it's, sometimes people have had difficult situations in their lives, and they've seen some stuff that's been disturbing, or they've been on welfare, they've lost their jobs, they've gone bankrupt, and it's hard when you say something, just have hope. No, it'll change. And they're like, well, I don't see anything changing. But this idea of maybe somehow it hooks people into this idea of hope.
So here's what I want to do then, Allison, is let's go back to talking about because what I'm hearing in this whole idea of the philosophy of maybe is something we talk about on Living Your Inspired Life all the time, which is the creative process. And when we are able to open our minds enough, we can then begin to, like you're talking about, right, rewriting our story. We can rewrite the story, and it can be in a way that is best for us, and it activates this creative process that we can't touch, feel, or see, or smell, or anything, but it's always moving and always activating by our feelings and our thoughts. So this idea of maybe feels like it opens us to being more flexible and more aware of how we can interact best with our lives. Like you were saying about sharing about your daughter and trying out for plays, and then she's finally starring in one. That's a creative process that you just keep going until you begin to experience the thing that you've been dreaming about.
Right. And your mind is not, and why it happens is because your mind's not in the past, because you recognize that this is a new moment and maybe everything could be different. Your mind's not in the future. You end up in the present. And that's where we create. Well, we're not afraid of what's going to be, and we're not bogged down by yesterday. We're just open to what could happen in life. And I think that's why it works so well. And I think that's why we enter that really open, creative space, because we're in the most alive place we could possibly be.
Yeah. I have a friend who often says in the work that he does, he says, I just take my hands off of it. I'm not gonna, manipulate it and make it the way I want. I'm just gonna take my hands off, like riding a bike, and just let go of the handlebars and go with the flow.
Right. But in the same way, he is riding his bicycle and he is going in a certain
direction. Yeah.
So, it's kind of a little bit of give and take. Like I love people when they set their goals and they set their intentions, because I find that it drives them. But again, like we said, that's not what trips them up. It's not the dream that trips them up. It's the journey and it not working out exactly how people want it to be. So with this idea of maybe you can get on the bike, you could ride, and you could say, well, I'm going to John's house down the block, but, sometimes there'll be a little bumps, and you have to be open to it. And the people that are most open are the ones that are going to find their way, wherever that way leads. Because I've seen people that say, I want to fall in love with this guy, I want to do this, I want to do that, and then things change, but they're so open that they end up doing something else with their life. And that's how it goes. As long as you follow your passion, you stay open, you will find the place you need to be.
Yeah, and then also in the maybe not, it keeps you flexible so that the self-doubt that might come up, and I think for many of us, there's lots of self-doubt.
Right, because we think we're not okay.
Right.
Right, and again, the battle in our mind, I am okay, I'm not okay. Well, Joe said I wasn't okay, Sam said, it's just, you end the battle, because maybe you are okay. And that's enough to get up and say, okay, maybe I could do this. I mean, there's a woman that, I don't know her, but my friend gave her my book, and she said that every morning this woman has terrible anxiety. She couldn't even deal with what she was going to wear to work, because what people would think of her. And literally, my friend told me this is what this woman is doing. She's waking up in the morning, she's saying, maybe this is okay. Maybe I could wear this. Now, it sounds something so simple to us, right? Because we don't have anxiety when we put clothes on in the morning. But this woman didn't feel okay, so she felt so judged. So this little idea of maybe just allows her to put her clothes on and go outside the door and say, maybe it's okay. Because when she was battling, I'm okay, I'm not okay, it was too painful for her. So now she found this open space where she could put on her clothes, go out the door, and get to work. And then when she gets to work, she realizes it's not so bad. But that's what happens. We're always projecting that things are going to be so bad, and we forget that most of the time, most of our fears don't even come to fruition.
Yeah, it's the anticipation of some unknown event, or even like in the case of somebody going to work, it's a known event, but it's the anticipation that just totally messes us up.
And then we don't do what we need to do because we're so worried. What I do often is I reel my clients back in. I'm like, you're in 2 years from now. You got to come back to the now. They're always projecting, well, if I do this, I start this business, well, what will happen with my license? What will happen? And I'm like, we just have to start. We have to go back to the beginning where you're 2 steps ahead of where you need to be. And yes, you have to plan, but sometimes I think people overplan, and they overplan because they're so afraid of what's going to happen next. So this idea of maybe, I think you're so open, you act when you need to act, and you pause when you need to pause, because you're not fear-based.
I love that. You act when you need to act, and you pause when you need to pause.
Right.
Allison, because what you just said, I am my Living Your Inspired Life team. Somebody will say, well, what do we do? Maybe we could do this. And immediately I'm in full-blown production in my mind about it, and then here's all the logistics we got to do. And here's how we have to figure it out. And where's the money? And blah, 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 blah. And they have to pull me back and go, wait, we're just thinking out loud. These are just maybes. So I've been talking with Allison Carmen, the author of The Gift of Maybe, Finding Hope and Possibility in Uncertain Times. And where can people get your book? On your website?
It's in all the major bookstores. And you can get it online at all the major retailers. And, that's where it's being sold.
And what about, are you still blogging right now, or are you just writing for?
Oh, no, I'm a blogger for life. I love it.
So where do people go to
you can go to my website at AllisonCarmen.com. And I also blog for Psychology Today and for the Huffington Post. And I also, write for several other websites. So if you just put my name in, my name pops up in several places. As much as I can spread the word, I try.
Awesome.
But on my website, I also write about things other than maybe. I write about, parenting, frustration, anger, hope. It's all there.
Allison, thank you so much for joining me today. I so have enjoyed this conversation about the gift of maybe. So I'm just going to say, and so it is, namaste.